For this reason, from Ephesians 3, verses 14 to 19. For this reason, I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Here ends the reading.
So we're going to have a little conversation with Christina Horning. We affectionately call her Teeny. I got this from your email. So how do you say Campus for Christus?
Campus for Christus.
So that's what we used to call Campus Crusade for Christ. But I think now sometimes we call it Cru. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Teeny's in Freiburg, Germany. Do you have an official title, position? What's your official title?
I am officially in charge of staff development for all of the staff in Germany, and on a team for the staff development in Western Europe.
Gotcha. Before I move on, I just want to double check. Can you guys see if this is recording? Is this recording?
Yeah.
Great. Fantastic. I'm also, do you guys know how I can make it so that the person talking is the only screen that comes up so it records better?
I think only if you get out of shared screen.
Okay. So,
yep.
Well, Teeny, I have the slides that you gave us. I asked Teeny to teach us about 3 questions. One, how is the state of the Christian church in Germany, where she is, in her part of Germany? Is it growing? Is it declining? Why, in her estimation, is it either growing or declining? And what might we be able to learn for our own context? And the reason that is I'm going to share again from last week. Whoops, I got to go back. This is from the book Canoeing the Mountains, Christian Leadership in Uncharted Territory, which when I talked with Teeny, she was very excited that we'd read it. Yeah, there she's holding the book up right there. So this is a line from the book, and I'm doing this to a little bit review, but also because I didn't record the whole thing last week. For those people that were not able to watch it, you'll get a little on-ramp here. It says, the statistics of the Western Church steady decline are well known, but most of us have been unprepared for how accelerated and disorienting that pace has become through the rapid and demonstrable marginalization of the church in Western society. Most churches, with few exceptions, are dying. And I last week shared some statistics from our denomination, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, that shows that there would be a steep decline, so that in 2017, when we had 3 million something members, by the year 2050, there'll be 66,000. A steep decline, and that's happening in other churches as well. And as Teeny showed, we are reading this book, Canoeing the Mountains, as staff and as elders in our church, that uses the illustration of the Lewis and Clark Corps of Discovery expedition from 1803 to 1806, that we're seeking to discover a waterway from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean that they sure was there, that they could mostly canoe all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Maybe after portage a little bit, at the headwaters of the Missouri River, but not that long. Well, they got to the headwaters of the Missouri River, climbed up the next ridge, and they saw the Rocky Mountains there. And they realized that they had to change everything that they were thinking about as to how this trip was going to continue. Their assumptions, their way of doing things, because you can't canoe the mountains. So that was kind of the metaphor. And in the same way as in the church in the United States, especially the mainline church, and our ELCA is an example of this, things have changed in our culture rapidly. Most churches are in decline. St. Luke is a church that is a little exception to that. We're kind of holding steady, but we're not necessarily growing that much. And, you know, you don't stay steady. You either grow or you decline. That's how it works. Mm-hmm. So we are trying to learn how we can do things differently to adapt, just like the Corps of Discovery had to adapt to the changing environment of the Rocky Mountains to continue their expedition, their adventure. We have to also adapt. And we thought one way to do that is to talk with some global partners who have maybe sometimes gone down this road already, and see what they have to say. So that's kind of the setup for it. And I'm going to turn it over to Teeny, and she's going to share some things. And then at the end, we can maybe open it up and have some discussion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, I just put together a few slides because I think it's good to be able to at least see something as well instead of just me. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's so great to be back with all of you, to see new faces and to see some that I know and some that I haven't seen in a long time. Yeah, so the first question, what's the current state of my part of Germany? For a lot of you know, some of you don't, I live in Freiburg, which is in the southwest corner of Germany. And a lot of people say the most beautiful city in Germany. I agree. So the picture you see is of our cathedral in the middle of town, taken just a few weeks ago when we had snow. And Freiburg is a special, I wrote there, it's in some ways it's a forerunner. I thought I'd start with the good news of is the church growing or declining? Freiburg has a very strong network of Christians. There are incredible things happening as far as Catholic, Protestant teaching, and people coming together. Actually, there's a prayer time for leaders that has been initiated for the last few years, where leaders from different denominations, as well as Christian leaders from different businesses, as well as our mayor and the second mayor of our city are both Christians, so they also come to the leaders' prayer. And we actually, for the first time, went away on a retreat this fall and prayed for the city. So I feel like that's not normal, and it's a huge blessing. And so that's why I wrote, I feel like Freiburg is really growing in depth in networking amongst Christians and really wanting to reach out to reach different parts of society. And there are people, Christians, that are kind of looking to Freiburg saying, oh, there's things that are happening there through the prayer house we have or through other things, and actually coming and kind of doing internships in Freiburg, or even the organization I work for, Crew. I'm at the moment the only staff here, but yeah, they're just hearing what's happening and thinking, okay, we need to maybe send some more staff. So I hope that happens. Yeah, so that's the good news of a lot that's happening. I could say a lot more. I'll maybe wait until there are questions or whatever. There are, however, as I wrote, there's still a majority of people who don't know Jesus. That's why I said there's a growth in the depth, but as far as the breadth is, there are still, I would say 90% probably of the people here are not Christians. Yeah, and in that, it's questionable, probably the same as you're experiencing, to know who of the people that were in churches have left the church. Because at the moment, we are permitted to meet as churches, but there are restrictions. And so some churches have decided to meet online only. So it's hard to really gauge who's really still around in the church. So that's the current situation as far as Freiburg goes in my area of Germany. I know you have a partnership with another church in northern eastern Germany, which is a whole different geographical and spiritual context. So I'm sure that would be exciting next week. And then you can go to the next slide. This is also the future of the church in Germany and also the current reality. And the title there, Generation Worship, is actually from a very relatively current study done by two Germans theologians a couple years ago about youth. So particularly ages 14 to 29, so youth and young adults, which is the future of the church. And these two men researched who are these people, and he looked into highly religious youth and young adults. So these are people that are very involved in the church and kind of saw what are they really doing and what are they like. And the result is that there's this huge trend of focus on worship, focus on experiencing things, worship being emotional, authentic, and having fellowship, which in itself is not a bad thing. Young people are hoping to really have a heart connection in worship between them and the Lord. The second thing is there's a synthesis of values, which basically means they're okay with contradictory things. For example, they might say, yeah, in the Bible it says Jesus is the only way to God, but you might believe in Buddha, and that's totally fine. So they're okay with things that are contradictory, and also see God as I like these terms are interesting, as both a spiritual butler and a cosmic therapist. So both kind of this person or this big being that kind of just really does anything you want and is there for your beck and call, and also a therapist, this person, this thing that is there to comfort you, to listen to your problems, to make sure you're okay. And that's kind of their view of God. The Bible is seen as less relevant to everyday life. It's seen as maybe a book that could be helpful, but definitely not the absolute truth. And mission is seen to be critical. And in this way, I think this is me thinking, doing English while I've been speaking German all day. Basically, it doesn't mean that seeing missions critically is, I think, what I wanted to say. So like they're skeptical about sharing who Jesus is because of this synthesis of values, saying, I don't want to force this on anyone, and everyone is kind of free to believe what they want. It's relative. So there's a pushback to actually sharing who Jesus is, and also a strong focus on worship, really having an experience with God, as I said before. And if you think about these trends, they're not all negative, but it's going in a very extreme, very emotional direction that's also very kind of gray and open to anything goes. And I think that makes me wonder what that looks like. Will these people want to tell people about Jesus? Will they share the Bible with their children, with their friends, if it's just kind of a book like any other, which makes me concerned for sure. There is another trend you see there at the bottom. There's a switch in the culture. I think I've also read true of the States, a switch from a guilt culture, a culture that feels guilty about things, to more of shame, that young people don't really identify with the fact that, feeling guilty for doing something wrong. It's more about, I'm ashamed of what I've done. And there again, it's important to think about, how do we share the gospel with these people? Do we use the words, you've sinned and you've fallen short of the glory of God? That's scripture. And talking about sinning and being guilty. And that's just a concept that is difficult for younger people to understand. So being aware of having to change how we explain the gospel without watering it down. So this is just a snippet in a current study that I think is really fascinating. Also, for me, it's helpful and good to see something actually valid and credited that's coming out of Germany. So hopefully it's going to be interesting for you. So what does that mean, or why did this happen? You can go to the next slide. What contributed to this growth and decline? First of all, in Freiburg, I would say, and generally, I think prayer. We do have a prayer house here in Freiburg, and I know I have been part of a lot of prayer, and I think for generations, people have prayed that, and a lot of you have prayed that God would work, and that it's produced growth, and also generations of people sowing seeds, sharing the gospel, investing in each other, and in the future generations. Also, we are now in the postmodern society, and where there's a focus, like the generation worship, on more experiencing things as opposed to absolute truth. And so there's generally an openness to want to hear about experiences with God or with religion, as opposed to there is one absolute truth, which kind of is the plus side. Is there's an openness to spirituality, which is an openness to hear about Jesus. And if you see the next one, decline, the postmodern society, on the flip side, thinking less there's actually an absolute truth, kind of makes it difficult for people to believe that, Christianity is a true religion, and that Jesus is the Son of God, and to focus on one religion and believe that that is true. Also decline, there's a general skepticism toward leadership based on, I wrote, bad experiences historically. I think the most obvious example would be World War II. There's just generally a lot of caution when there's strong leadership, and it's generally accepted and expected even that you would question things, not follow blindly. And I think that also kind of bleeds into religion, and even thinking about the validity of the Bible, just going into the next point of the value of critical thinking and the tendency to look for opposing opinions. So you might hear a really good message about Jesus, but almost the natural reaction then is to look at, for example, something that negates Jesus and his validity as God's son. And I actually just read a newspaper article today about how that's getting, even with media and things, more extreme, that in the media, that as soon as they hear a report in one direction, it's natural for reporters to look for an opposing opinion, just because that's what you do. And I think that's kind of eating away at the faith aspect that is difficult sometimes to prove to the last detail. Also, decline is also a bonus and a negative. The German schools of theology, there have been lots and lots and lots of German theologians. Obviously, as a Lutheran church, Martin Luther had some really, really good theology, and there have been some really, really interesting and very contradictory and unbiblical German theology over the years, and I think that has kind of broken away at the Christian structure here in Germany over the last centuries. Next slide. Thank you. What can we learn? Pastor Steve, the first quote Pastor Steve kind of talked about at the beginning. What got us here won't get us there is a quote that is from the Canoeing the Mountains, where they got to the mountains and they realized, oh, these canoes will not get us further. And I think that's one thing we as a ministry and organization have thought about a lot. We as an organization and we as a church, what we've been doing as a church so far will not get us further, because the society is changing so rapidly and we need to change with it, and we need to evaluate where we are and get on the balcony. That's a term from the book. Some of you who are reading it will recognize it, but if you haven't read the book, not a problem. Getting outside of situation, looking at it, evaluating where are we, where are the people in our communities, what do they need, and meeting them where they are, just as so many people have done in the Bible, just as Jesus did. Looking at the situation, seeing what people need, which goes with a point below, being a go instead of a come church. I'm not sure if this is also a language thing, but it's easy to understand. I think in the past we have, as a church, often offered things for people to come to our church, to come to Bible study, to come to VBS, come to whatever, and those are not bad things, but we need to be ready to go to the people, to go to their needs, to go to what they're doing, and to share Jesus there, and to share our experiences, going back to, you know, the postmodern and the trend to really want to experience things, to share what you've experienced with God instead of feeling like you need to give a long report on who Jesus is. I said, let's be witnesses. That's what Jesus calls us to do, instead of lawyers, to share and tell of what we've experienced instead of feeling like we need to defend something. Share prayer care is a strategy that we have here in Europe in Crew, and that's basically just sharing our experiences with people, praying for them and caring for their needs. Very simple, and some of you probably do that already. But yeah, it's all about people experiencing the love of God. And lastly, have conversations with young people, thinking about this generation worship and thinking about them being okay with contradictions, and maybe the Bible just not really being valid. Talk to them, talk about what they've experienced, share what we've experienced with young people, and obviously lastly, pray, because prayer is powerful and prayer is good for all of us.